Welcome to Fintech Insider News on air, another episode at a slightly later time today. We're moving a little bit later so that we can align it around podcasts, and well, we wanted more of you to see the show, and some of you said today this was better, catching you before you go home with some Fintech Insider News.
Have we become that sort of mid-afternoon slump, get a coffee, pretend to do some work before you go home moment?
Well, Thirsty Thursday is a thing. So you're about to go out and drink. What do you need before you go? You need that fintech news that you're going to discuss. So that's what we're here for. So as ever, we have Zoe joining us. Zoe, take us away with the first question.
Question 1 from Fegan. What makes a great product manager and why is it different from just being a project program manager? What's the career path to being a product manager?
So there's two questions there. I'm going to let Jason talk about career path because I've heard him answer this one a bunch of times and it's always quite fun every time I see him getting a little more pained. And Jason's pain is my pleasure. No, not Schadenfreude, not Schadenfreude. So the difference between program and product manager is something I've heard a lot of product managers kind of moan about over the years, because the difference, I guess project management is very much, here are your set of tasks, let's go deliver those tasks, and has the outcome happened, have people signed off on it? Whereas a product manager is a much wider role. You're really thinking of as I'm stealing your term, but it's mini CEO. You have to be able to do everything from strategy to really understanding customers, to be thinking 5 years out, to be understanding the operational side, to be that advocate of the customer in every single way. And that does have some project skills in it, but I'd say it's 80% not project. But I have definitely met some product managers in financial services for whom doing any sort of that skill seems to be something that they're trying to get away from, and they want anybody else to do the organizing for them. You do have to be pretty organized and disciplined, I think. Jason, what would you add to that?
I think that's a really good point around the creating outcomes for end customers versus actually delivering a project. We often talk to 11FS clients about the fact that we just don't want to do projects where here's the deliverables, here's the time frame, this is what we do, tick, 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 green, red, amber status. It's just shuffling papers around and getting internal outcomes. I think product management is very much out there delivering great, valuable services for end customers. I think the other distinction is one between product leadership and product management. And quite often this is voiced in the sort of product management community as the poet versus the librarian, which I guess are derogatory terms for both types. I don't think either type of project leader or project manager would want to be called that. But ultimately, the distinction is one about is the product manager someone who is the visionary, the person who in this marketplace of uncertainty and complexity, and there not being just this one key outcome that everyone could easily agree on, is out there selling the vision for what this product is. So a customer has a need, and there's this combination of customer needs and research and really understanding that together with the design, service design, product design on delivering it, the underlying technology products, especially in fintech, the regulatory financial products, and how these things come together. And so for me, actually, there's a distinct lack often in banks of product leadership, having that really strong vision and view as to where you're going, not just now, but in a few years' time, that can actually pull a team together because you sell them this vision, everyone buys in, and suddenly there's a cohesive team delivering it. Now, quite often you see that at the start of a fintech or the start of a new proposition. You need that in order to create that cohesive team with a goal. But as a team scales, we get much more from product leadership to product management. How do we have a number of product teams, 5, 10, 20 product teams working on different facets of the product, whether it's onboarding or doing a particular type of payment or search or a whole host of different things? And how do you use customer and end client feedback in order to iterate on that product and actually create something better? So there's almost a maturity of the digital products and different types of product manager you need at different points. But it is very different from that typical coordinating role of let's run the Gantt chart or let's run a scrum. There's something about bringing together customer needs, design and technology to deliver great outcomes for those end customers.
There we go. I don't think there's anything I could possibly add. That was fantastic.
Next question is sent in from an anonymous sender who works in... Anonymous. See, it's a little bit later in the day and I've completely just gone to mush already. I need a coffee. So you can send in a question if you don't want to be named to fin@11fs.com. This one is from someone specifically who works in a tier 1 bank. If you could give my CEO one piece of advice to save our bank, what would it be?
Ooh, save the bank. I don't know. Is the bank going to go under anytime soon? I think banks get bailed out when they're getting too threatened. I think save the bank is an interesting term because actually a lot of parts of banks are quite profitable. They work. They're producing for customers and most customers are not switching. They're not leaving their banks, especially older customers. So I think the question, maybe I want to rephrase it a little bit. How do you make the bank grow into what it's going to become in the future? And I think that's the thing that a lot of CEOs are really concerned about at the moment. How does it grow into what it needs to be truly digital? And I think if you frame the question in that sense, then I immediately think about, well, what are the things that those customers are thinking about? What are the problems in those customers' lives? And does the CEO understand those? And how do you frame those in a way that they can understand how digital might help them deliver against some of that? So I don't know if it's saving the bank, Jason.
My advice would be schizophrenic. Because actually we're living in this transition time. You're running a large, successful, often multinational bank with tens of thousands of people working there. All kinds of complex products and processes and procedures and everything in place. That has to keep going. That has to improve. You have to drive costs out of the business. You have to drive quarter-on-quarter growth. But I think the schizophrenia comes with understanding that there are these existential threats to that model. So as well as driving that model, you've got to find the next one. And that next one very much is about those next generation financial services rather than flogging financial products. It's about that real-time, intelligent, contextual stuff that we talk about all the time. And actually that future of what the bank will be. And I don't think you can hold those two things in the same organization in your head at the same time. So you've got to be driving towards what is this sort of existential future for my organization at the same time as driving the profit and the growth of the bank that you've got now.
Completely. I think CEOs are always concerned about share price as well. And what's going to drive share price is not a cost-cutting story. Fundamentally, organizations that talk about cutting cost, their share price tends to go down. So unless you've got a story about growth, then what's the CEO telling their investors in their market? Now, if they're just a yield stock and that's all they ever want to be, then maybe that's going to work for them. But I don't know that that's going to drive the share price in the place it needs to be. So consider that argument as well. I know that's something that's resonated a few times. All right, Zoe, next question.
If you could build a bank in any vertical right now, i.e. commercial, retail, etc., then which would it be and why? From Anonymous.
I know, Jason, you've been salivating after a few for a little while, haven't you?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. I think my number one choice would be an SME bank, because I think there's a question coming later today actually on SME banks. They're by far the most underserved market. You know, to run a small, medium-sized business takes so much on invoices and bills and cash flow and expenses and sales. You know, it's not about accounting. It really is about that financial management. And I think that's a prime candidate in order to do something good. I think my second choice, because I'm going down the list, I've got a whole list here, I think would be something around open banking and PSD2. I think there's some amazing opportunities in the identity space, in loyalty, in some adjacencies that aren't account aggregation and management. And the fact that this has just opened up, like now, there's just this window at the moment where a whole new industry, a whole new city has opened up where you can actually do some really interesting things. And I think third, I'd like to do something in savings and wealth. I think we've seen lots of of traditional savings products and analog products. I don't think we've seen the next digital player there. And I think that is a very different context from that everyday financial services, Monzo style, this is what I'm using in order to get from paycheck to paycheck. So I think we need to see a player there as well.
All great opportunities. I've got a couple of niche examples around that as well. So in the small business space, I really think trade finance, there are a lot of banks that specialize in trade finance, but there's very few that do it well for small businesses. Actually, if somebody can offer good services to small businesses in terms of international trade, I think that's something that would make an SME bank really stand out as a proposition, on top of the fact that they're just doing it well, because actually SME banking tends to be retail banking plus a tiny little bit, or even quite often not even that. And then in the savings and investment space, I love this idea of how do you build more of a relationship with a customer that isn't necessarily kind of high net worth individual, but mass affluent, or maybe even less. How do you build a 20-year time horizon relationship with somebody through the virtues of digital, through having a real-time relationship with them, understanding their context, being intelligent about what their goals are and helping them get there. So I think there are things like that really excite me. And when you start thinking about being with somebody's business lifetime, or being with somebody's customer lifetime and goals lifetime, what does that look like in a digital context? And I don't think we've seen the best propositions that could be built in that. It's 1% finished for sure. Zoe.
Thanks, guys. Next up, from forever our loyal fangirl, Barb McLean. What's the biggest changes that you've observed in the financial services this last year?
Bob, we love you. So the biggest last year has got to be, this is probably going to have a European bias, but for me it's how big of a subject open banking has become. I think it's now become normal for people to talk about this at an executive level. It's become normal that we're dealing with it and living with it. And I think attached to that is that it's become normal to think about building propositions for that. It's become normal that we are working with what does an end-to-end customer journey look like, and we're thinking outside of just banking contexts at last. It's not just we're going to aggregate accounts like Jason was saying. We're starting to think about, actually, is it buying a house? Is it saving for university? Is it what are these end-to-end goals that a person has, a bit like in the last answer, and how can we start building those services that meet people's longer term goals? That's what I think has been a bit of a change, but I still think there's a ways to go in that coming. This is the very, very beginning of that change.
I think that the biggest change in the last year has been a change in narrative from we're going to spend $1 billion on digital transformation internally, and we're going to just move this whole organization, to a lot more conversations on we're going to build something separately outside of the bank or the insurer or the whoever we talk to. I heard Anthony Jenkins from Barclays on a podcast, not one of ours I should say, but one of ours last night, and he was saying exactly the same thing. And I think there's this understanding now that this Gordian knot of processes and procedures and governance and incentivization and systems and everything else in a large bank just makes it phenomenally difficult to do those next generation things. I think a lot of people have tried, and now we're seeing actually just a lot of the big players now looking at this as a viable opportunity, which is of course great for us, but definitely a trend. Zoe.
Next from Amika Nwanu. The importance of SMEs to the economy cannot be overemphasized, but I don't think this importance is reflected in the current state of SME banking, business banking. What are your thoughts on SME banking, and what influenced your answer?
So I'm going to answer that in reverse. What influenced my answer is as...
You've not given your answer, how do we know?
Yeah. All right, patience. Patience is a virtue. So the zero kind of a dashboard is really the front end for a lot of people in small businesses. The thing that you work with day to day as a small business owner is not your bank account. You go to that when there's a transaction. And so I was speaking to a bank executive who's getting more and more concerned about the gap between them and their customer getting larger and larger and larger, and more platforms sitting in there. And that adjacency, as you said earlier, is the real area of innovation. And what are financial services companies doing to really add value there? To me, that's the biggest macro trend, is help me manage my business. Help me understand my cash flow. Help me understand what the future is going to look like. Help me understand what my tax implications are going to be. Help me understand my business better. And I don't think organizations have really done that particularly well. And so that's going to be the biggest trend. How do you marry that? Maybe it's with open banking, maybe it's with partnerships, maybe it's with building new experiences. But what's that going to look like?
No, I agree. I think it's the service gap is what I'm always interested in. So, okay, you let a certain customer segment have access to an account and a balance and a list of transactions and the ability to move money. But given that they've got that, what work do they have to do to manage their lives, to manage their businesses, to manage their investments and savings? And the more work there is in that gap, the more opportunities there are for technology and fintechs to actually jump in there and do that work for them. And whether that fintech or those services are provided by the bank itself, or whether someone, as Simon was alluding to, intermediates themselves and actually ends up delivering that based on your banking platform, then becomes something we'll find out in the future. So I think SME banking is one of those areas where that service gap is the most felt. We've run small businesses, as I'm sure many of you have, and the number of things that you have to do simultaneously to manage your finances, not just your accounts in terms of what tax am I paying next year or having to submit them to the government, but working out whether you can make payroll next month, or that when my invoices are needed in order to chase up, or what bills I've got to pay in 30 or 60 days, and how all of these things line up. A lot of the accounting platforms still give you that accountancy view, not the business owner, business manager view. So I think that there's this big service gap, which really does provide opportunities to go a long way beyond here's a simple account, a commodity analog account, and to build services on there. And there's going to be, I think, quite a competitive market in the next couple of years as some of the big banks and even small ones like Tide and Coconut start to really get to grips with this, especially as Making Tax Digital comes along, a thing by HMRC to get everyone online to be registering their tax.
Indeed.
And that's it for today. Thanks for joining again. Please keep your questions coming. Are we here again at the same time next week, guys?
You say that with a question, of course.
So it's going to be 4:30 from now on, just so everyone across the world can, most of the world can actually can actually tune in. Time for a beer, I think.
Well, a beer, and then get ready for the podcast.
It's podcast time, people. Monday's news show's about to be recorded. Exciting times.